Good morning and welcome to Southern Tier Gardening. My name's Eric. Today is April 24th, and for today's video I just wanted to do a full garden tour. I live in South Georgia, hardiness zone 8B. In my backyard here I have two in-ground garden plots. Each one measures 15 by 25 feet. So, starting over here, this is where I have my potatoes growing. I have 4 rows of potatoes planted. Each row is 20 feet long. These first 2 rows right here are my red potatoes. The variety is called Viking. And these 2 rows are Yukon Gold potatoes. I planted these potatoes on February 13th, and potatoes take anywhere from 80 to 100, sometimes 120 days to mature. So I'll start checking and digging underneath and looking at these potatoes in early May, and hopefully we'll be harvesting lots of potatoes sometime in the middle of May. So a few more weeks on these, but these are just doing great. I just love how they look. I love this foliage. They're just beautiful plants. Really fun. If you've never grown potatoes, I highly encourage you to give it a try. Now, this is also the garden where I had my red onions growing. And you can see this is the final harvest. I have about 30 nice big red onions. Now what I did yesterday was I pulled these onions out of the ground. And the last step you want to do when you're growing onions, especially if you want to store them and you want them to keep longer, is you have to cure them. And how I cure my onions, there's lots of different ways to do this, but I'm not expected to get any rain this week, so I have a little bit of a dry spell ahead of me. So this is a perfect time to cure your onions, and I do it right here outside. What I do is I pull the onion out of the ground, and I just lay them here in the dirt, and they'll just lay here in the sunshine. And let me show you here. What you want to look for, what you want to do, is this takes about 4 or 5 days. But as these lay here in the sun, this part of the plant where the stem hits the bulb, this will start to dry out. It'll turn brown and it'll get very dry. Also, the roots will dry out. You basically want the top and the bottom of the onion to really dry out good. It's called curing. And if that's done correctly, I will be able to store these onions for 3 or 4 months in a cool, dry location. I'll put them in a pantry in my house. But that's why I have these laid out like this, because I'm going to cure them. I have about 30 onions here, and I'm not going to be able to eat them in a weekend or two, so I want to be able to store these onions and have them for a few months. So that's what that looks like. They're just going to lay there. Now, if I think I'm going to get an unexpected rain, I will pick all these onions up and I'll put them in my garage or my shed. At this point, you don't want them to get wet. You want them to be nice and dry, and hopefully they are out here in the sun and they'll cure up real nicely for me. Now, I'll I'll show you guys, give you an update. This container here, I have planted green onions. In the past, I've never had any luck growing green onions directly in the ground. So this season, I tried a container planting. And what I did was I just bought 2 packets of seeds. When you buy these onions in the store, they're also called bunching onions. But I just bought 2 packets of seeds, and 1 packet on this side, I just sprinkled them in the container, the entire packet. And this side, the variety is called Warrior. And this side of the container, the variety is called White Lisbon. And as I compare the 2 varieties, they're both doing good, but the White Lisbon seem to be doing a little bit better. The onions are taller, they're darker green, and the stems themselves are a little bit thicker. Now the Warrior onions are doing good, they're just not quite as big and quite as dark green. So comparing the 2 varieties, moving forward, I will probably plant only the White Lisbon. They seem to be performing a little bit better. But I'm really happy with how this container is working out. I love these onions. And like I say, I've just never had any luck growing them in the ground, so this seems to be the method that I'll use, you know, from now on. So that's my green onions. Now we can walk over here to the main garden plot on this side. And over here, this is where I have most of my, my classic summer vegetables planted. So we can start with this row. This first row, I have 5 yellow squash plants. And if you look, I planted 7 plants, but unfortunately, the 2 that were planted here to the back, they died. I believe they had real bad transplant shock. They died pretty quickly. But these other 5 plants are doing great. See if we can get down here. This is morning here. I love coming out here in the morning. These are flowering now. You can just see how beautiful these flowers look. And in these plants, I'm loaded with yellow squash. If you look in these plants, I'm starting to just see, lots of yellow squash in here. Pretty neat. These are coming along great. And what I did here at the end, in the space where my 2 squash plants died, I filled in with 2 tomato plants. I had some extra tomato transplants. So this one is a variety called Carolina Gold. It's a determinate, and it produces a medium yellow sized tomato. And this variety is called Parks Whopper Improved, and that's an indeterminate red tomato. Now, moving along, I did have a setback this year in this garden. I made a huge mistake this year, and I planted some things in this garden way too early. I planted this garden on March 19th, and shortly thereafter we had some cold weather. And if you remember my last video, if you look at these next 3 rows, these are my determinate tomatoes. I planted 24 Celebrity, the variety was called Celebrity, and I planted those here on March 19th, and unfortunately I lost all of them. They all died due to the cold weather, so I had to come back in here and replant these. But it actually, I think, ended up it's going to work out good for me, because when I went back to the garden center to buy more transplants, they had a variety there that I've never planted before, and it's called Amelia. And I've always wanted to grow Amelia tomatoes. They were developed in the South, and they are known to be very disease resistant, and they're known to grow very well in my area and produce lots of really delicious tomatoes. I also planted fewer plants. If you look at these rows, when I planted my celebrity tomatoes, I had 8 plants per row. So 3 rows would have been 24 plants. I learned, you can see how close together or how full these plants are getting. I learned that I planted those way too close together. So when I replanted with these Amelias, I only put 6 of them in a row. So that gives them a little bit more space. I can't stress enough how important it is to properly space your plants. The tendency is to just try to, and I was guilty of this early on. I would try to plant as many plants in my garden space as I could fit. And what I've learned over the years is you don't want to crowd your plants. See how far apart I've got these squash? That's for a reason. You want there to be plenty of space for light and for air circulation in between your plants. So it was a huge setback to lose all my celebrity tomatoes, but I think in the long run it's going to work out great for me, because I was able to plant a variety that I've always wanted to, that I think is going to perform really good. These Amelia tomatoes, everyone tells me they're just a great variety, and it allowed me to make an adjustment to my spacing. You can also see I have my Florida weave string and T-post method set up here. I've talked about, instead of using tomato cages on these plants, I use this method that's called the Florida weave. And I put 5-foot T-posts in the ground, and you just take some string, and that's what's used to hold up the plants. These plants don't get quite as tall as indeterminate tomatoes, so you really don't have to have cages on these. Plus, expense-wise, I've got 18 plants here. Actually, I'll show you this one. I have 17. I did have one plant die. You can see this plant here. I don't know what happened, but one plant died, so I'm down to 17 plants. But, you know, to buy 17 tomato cages adds up. And like I say, you just don't really need them for these plants. These plants will grow to about 4 or 5 feet tall, and that's as tall as they'll get. Then they will set, all the fruit will develop more or less at the same time and ripen at the same time. So determinate tomatoes, it's sort of a one-time harvest. So I'll have a ton of tomatoes ready at the same time, and these are the tomatoes that I will use mainly for my canning tomatoes. I'll eat a lot of them fresh. They're still delicious, but anyway, I just wanted to kind of show you that method of supporting these tomatoes. So what you do is you just kind of, you tie the string to the T-post, and then you just zigzag. You come down with the string and you weave it, in and out of the plants, tie it around the post, continue down, zigzagging. Then you get to the other T-post, tie it around, and come back with your string, zigzagging back and forth. And it's just a great way to support your determinate tomato plants, especially if you're growing quite a few tomatoes. So now we can continue down to this next row. These first 3 tomato plants right here, these three are a determinate variety called Carolina Gold. This is the same variety. I told you I had one extra plant over there. These produce a medium-sized yellow tomato. Now, at the back of this row, you can see I have a cattle panel trellis set up. I attached it to 2 T-posts using just zip ties, and this is where I have my cucumbers planted. I have 8 or 9, 1, 2, 3, I got 8 cucumber plants planted at the bottom of this trellis, and you can see they're starting to grow up the trellis real nicely, exactly what I wanted to have happen. I decided to grow my cucumbers this way for a couple reasons. One was space. I used to just let my cucumbers grow and spread out all over the ground, and it used to take up a lot of space in my garden. But now, growing them vertically like this, I can grow the same number of plants in much less space, allowing me to grow, you guessed it, more tomatoes. But anyway, the other reason I'm growing them vertically this year is to prevent disease. Growing cucumbers this way, they're naturally a vine. They want to grow vertically. It keeps the plants up off the ground. It exposes them, their access to sunlight is improved, and there's improved air circulation. You can see these plants, when they're growing like this, there's lots of space in between them, and having that good air circulation and these plants aren't crowded together and growing on the ground, I think I'm going to have even a better harvest this year. I think I'm going to end up growing more tomatoes, and my plants won't die as quickly. Typically down here in my heat and humidity, my cucumber plants pretty much die off around mid to late June. But I think by growing them, I hope by growing them on this trellis, that I can get some more life out of them and maybe even get, more, ultimately have more cucumbers. So that's pretty cool. I'm really happy. These plants are really starting to grow up the trellis and are just doing great. See if we can come around here. I just think this new growth on these is absolutely beautiful. You can see the new growth. Seems like every day I come out, these things are taller, and very pleased with that so far. So, as we continue on over to this side of the garden plot, we can start right here. Right here I have 3 eggplants growing. The variety is called Black Beauty. It's pretty much the standard eggplant variety that everyone's familiar with. These are the eggplants that you're going to find in the grocery store. I've grown this before and they do real well here. You can kind of see I've got some good new growth. I was worried about these eggplant with that cold weather we had. These were very stunted, but thank goodness with our warm weather we've had recently, these are really starting to pop now. You can see the new growth, and I'm confident that these are going to survive. We even had, if you look at this leaf, you can see the holes in there. We even had a hailstorm that week when we had the cold weather. And for the first time, if you look at this leaf, I would initially say that's some sort of an insect or bug damage. But what that was hail damage. So these plants took quite a beating, but luckily they all survived. Now, as we look at this side of the garden, back here, these plants and 2 plants back there, these are my pepper plants. Starting with these first three here that I have in cages, these are my poblano peppers. The reason I put cages on poblano peppers, if you've never grown them, most pepper plants don't get too tall. You know, a jalapeno or a banana pepper, even a bell pepper, they're only going to get 3, maybe 4 feet tall. But these poblanos, these things grow really tall. It's nothing for them to get 5, sometimes even 6 feet tall. So that's why I use a full 5-foot cage on my poblano peppers. Now at the end here, past the poblanos, I have 2 sweet or mild banana peppers growing. I've grown those before. They do real well for me. In general, if I were to say the one crop for me that gives me the fewest problems, it's peppers. They're just, in my opinion, they're really easy to grow, and I've had real good luck with them. Last peppers that I have in this in-ground garden, if you look at these 3, these are my jalapenos. They're doing real good. I'm starting to get some flowers. You can see right here, hopefully there's a pepper flower. But these jalapenos are doing real good. Now what I will do with these instead of a cage is on this end I'll put a wooden stake. And on this end I'll put a wooden stake. And I'll run string in between them. And that's how I'll support these pepper plants. Because jalapenos and banana peppers, they just don't get quite as tall as the poblanos. Now, I also am growing 2 cayenne pepper plants, but instead of putting them in the ground in my garden, I have those 2 cayenne pepper plants growing in a container. I kind of ran out of space in my garden, and those plants don't get big at all. So for my really, really hot pepper this year, they're about a 40,000 on the Scoville. I planted 2 cayenne peppers. So, lastly here on the tour, these last 2 rows are all indeterminate tomato plants. So these plants grow a lot differently than the determinants. You can already see how tall these plants are getting in relation to the cages. Indeterminate tomato plants, instead of growing to a predetermined height and stopping, indeterminates will just keep growing and growing taller and taller as long as you keep them healthy, and they will keep producing tomatoes throughout the season as long as you keep them healthy. So over here on this row in front of my jalapenos, I have 3 tomatoes growing. These are 3 more of those Parks Whopper Improved. I said I had 1 back in that corner. These are my other 3. And Parks Whopper Improved is just, it's a variety of big red beefsteak type tomato that's very disease resistant. That's why I chose it. They're known to grow really well in my heat and humidity. Now, the last row here, these plants, I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all my cherry tomatoes. And specifically, this one, and this one are a variety that's called yellow pear. They produce a small yellow pear-shaped cherry tomato. This one in the middle, this is my only red cherry tomato variety. It's called Juliet's Hybrid. It was recommended to me as a really prolific variety of red cherry tomato. And last but not least, for today's tour, I have 1 tomato plant growing here. This is another indeterminate, and this variety is called Beefmaster. Beefmaster is probably my favorite big red tomato to grow. Last year, this variety produced for me my first 2-pound tomato. It just produces huge tomatoes. It is a little more susceptible to disease. That's why I only planted one, but I like to plant this one just to give it a try and hopefully get a nice big tomato from it. So that's a full tour of what I've got going on at this point in the season in my gardens. Today's a really nice day. I'm going to do some cultivation out here in the garden. I'm going to do a little weeding. I'm going to be watering later. But I just wanted to show everybody what's going on. So I hope you liked this video. And I'll see you next time at Southern Tier Gardening.